A lot of the president's opponents and critics claiming that this is much more about sort of a public relations stunt and the president trying to change the subject from news that is less favorable to him.
But we're going to stick with the US for now, because also as part of that press conference, Donald Trump announced he'll deploy the National Guard to Washington, D.C. and bring the city police force under federal control. He says that will restore law and order to the city. It's a pretty unprecedented step. No US leader has used this presidential power since its creation. Donald Trump described it as Liberation Day for Washington, D.C.
The Metropolitan Police Department and the federal authorities will be supported in the effort, a really big effort, the 800 D.C. National Guardsmen that we'll put on, and much more if necessary, much more. You remember I said, I offered 10,000 once. Remember I said to a certain person, who I thought always was highly overrated, not very competent. But I said, if you need them, we'll give you 10,000 of the military or the National Guard. They turned me down. But if necessary, we're going to move service members directly to joining the Guardsmen. And that'll take place very rapidly, and that'll be done in conjunction with Pam and with Pete and everybody else.
Molly Ball is a senior political correspondent for the Wall Street Journal in Washington, so we can go live there now. Molly, hello.
Hello there.
So explain the justification that Donald Trump used for pulling on the lever of this sort of extraordinary measure.
The main justification appears to be the things that the president sees from inside his motorcade as he's driving around Washington, D.C. And also there was recently a sensational violent crime involving a former Doge staffer, the young man affectionately known as Big Balls, who was assaulted by a group of teens on the street in Washington, D.C., thus sort of substantiating many people's concerns about crime and disorder in the city. And at this wide-ranging press conference this morning, the White House press staff also distributed, charts and graphs and handouts to claim that violence in Washington is a big problem. However, by historical standards, violent crime is actually at a 30-year low here in Washington, D.C. And after an explosion of all types of crime all across the country that coincided with the 2020 protests and the pandemic, there's been a subsidence really nationally where crime has really gone down. So a lot of the president's opponents and critics claiming that this is much more about sort of a public relations stunt and the president trying to change the subject from news that is less favorable to him.
Because Donald Trump has made sort of central to his presidency command of law and order. I mean, he said, in conflict kind of with what you've just described, that the Capitol's been, I'm quoting here, taken over by violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals.
That's right. And as you say, this law and order slogan has been a big part of Trump's political appeal for a long time. He is, of course, a New Yorker, and a lot of the context that he comes from appears to be, the sort of battles over crime and policing that have always been a staple of New York urban politics. But in political terms, in the United States, the vast majority of American cities are controlled by Democrats, the bulk of whose voters do live in cities. But most of Trump's voters live outside of cities. They live in rural areas and small towns, or in the suburbs and exurbs further from the city. So I think, a political scientist would explain this appeal as Trump messaging to his base that he's tackling, the urban disorder that they find so frightening, whether or not it truly exists.
So what has the political reaction been within Washington, D.C.?
Well, the Congress is on hiatus right now for its annual August recess, but there is a congressional role in all this in the sense that because D.C. has this right of home rule that you heard referenced, which comes from a decades-old law, there is some mechanism of federal oversight, but in order to actually take over, policing in the district, Trump has to declare a state of emergency, which he's just done. And there also has to be sign off from the congressional committee that oversees DC, which they've also transmitted today. The Democrats, both in Congress and outside, have largely decried Trump's push, both calling it a sort of authoritarian overreach, Trump abusing his power with this crackdown, invoking, the militarization in Los Angeles a few months ago in this context. Democrats also say that Trump is trying to change the subject because the news cycles haven't been favorable to him in the last few weeks, whether you're talking about the rifts within his own base over the Jeffrey Epstein files, or the jobs numbers that came out over the past couple of weeks that seem to show a potential softening in the economy.
In very practical terms, what will it mean when the National Guard are deployed? What will they be doing that's different to the police?
It's a very good question because the legalities of it are very complicated in terms of what the National Guard or other federal police, such as the Park Police, are actually permitted to do in terms of crime fighting arrests and so forth. And so we're still trying to figure out exactly what powers they will have. And we saw this in Los Angeles, that critics of the Trump effort of deploying the National Guard and military in Los Angeles pointed out that because they couldn't do things like street policing, because they're trained in military and not in, riot suppression or what have you, they were largely reduced to sort of standing around courthouses and other federal property that they were allowed to sort of guard. So I think there are a lot of questions. Even, this began over the weekend, this National Guard deployment, and residents of Washington did see various federal officers deployed on the streets over the course of the weekend. So it is a visible presence. But again, I think there's still a lot of work to be done to dot the I's and cross the T's and figure out what these officers are actually supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and for how long, and how Donald Trump would mark whether that had been an achievement or not. Well, this Liberation Day he's described for Washington, D.C. Molly, thank you for explaining it to us. Molly Ball, senior political correspondent for the Wall Street Journal in Washington.